Well, why don't we get started then so that we at least have some time for discussion. Welcome. My name is Michele Grimm. I am a faculty member at Michigan State University. I am a member of the commission, the Global Commission on Healthy Longevity. And what I was asked to do today is spend a few minutes just going over my research to put a start to this, but then to spend most of the time opening it up to discussion with the breakout group to see what everyone thinks about some of the challenges that we're facing. So in terms of the grand challenge in healthy longevity, the research that I do is in the area of design science. How can we design things better for the individuals that we hope to use them? And we can often figure out how old somebody is by whether or not they remember certain elements of science fiction and things that were supposedly truly unachievable just a few years ago, including robotics-assisted surgery and tricorders from Star Trek and talking cars and robots helping around the house. Really we're getting closer and closer to those science fact possibilities as we move forward. And as we do that, we need to make sure that actually we are going to have technology that is going to be adopted by the individuals that we are designing it for. And in order to do that, in order to not put up additional hurdles that are in our way, we really need to work to understand user needs, think about what factors may affect our intended users adopting new technologies, develop common technological frameworks, so standards and things that allow people to move from one particular type of application to another, or one particular brand to another, and also then discuss some of the policies that support adoption. And this is not really the way that design has occurred in the most part, especially outside the realm of biomedical engineering. It's generally been thought, oh, we will design something, and of course people will want to use it. But often that then results in an expensive paperweight sitting on somebody's desk who designed that particular object. When we look at understanding user needs, one of the key things that a lot of engineers are not taught is that user needs change for an individual. They can change over a long term, but they can also change within a day. If you have a patient who is sunsetting due to some cognitive decline, their ability to interact with a system is going to change during that day. We also need to include, as a user, both formal and informal caregivers who may affect adoption of a particular technology or be the ones that are going to actually use it. So it's really important that as engineers, we don't assume what people need. We need to look at interviews for our potential users and their caregiving framework. We need to actually observe them in their environment using ethnography practices and have a conversation with them so that we can really understand what it is they want, what it is they need before we start the design process. So one of the projects I had this summer at Michigan State, we have an RU program in what's called socio-mobility. So how do we involve the social sciences and engineering into looking at autonomous vehicle systems? And this particular project involved 4 students, and they interviewed 3 groups of individuals about what those individuals thought they would want or need in autonomous transportation that would connect them from their home to a public transportation system. So first mile, last mile transportation. And they looked at 3 different populations and then did qualitative analysis of the interviews and really identified the areas of need into 5 basic groups. And I'm not going to go into the details of the findings, but what they found was that statistically, as we would expect, but it was good that they proved it to themselves, there were differences in what individuals indicated they thought were important needs based on their age group. So designing for yourself as a young engineer does not necessarily help you design for the target age group. In addition, if you're designing something that you're thinking is going to be used 10 years from now, you need to look at what the needs are going to be of the group that will be the targeted population at that time. And so when we look at improving user-centered design, and I do a lot of work on engineering education pedagogies, I'm trying to improve the ability of all engineers to really think about how we include users within the design process through interviews, through focus groups, and as I said, through observation and ethnography, something that most engineers are not taught about. And we really want to strive for empathetic design. So not only user-centered, but really understanding what the needs are of those intended users. We also need to think of things from a systems perspective and understand what changes are needed in terms of infrastructure and policy. There's a lot of interest right now in personalization of devices and systems, and developing systems that can really change with that user's needs and fit their particular needs very closely. And really, to do this, we need to have collaborations, not only between scientists and engineers, but also involving social scientists who can help us better understand what the various factors are that are going to affect the populations that we're designing for. And I spent 3 years at the NSF. One of the big words at NSF was convergence. And this is an example of that convergence that we can start to achieve. So in order to do this, we really need to look at all of these societal factors so that we can, when we design something, it actually will be used. It's no fun as an engineer to design something and have it sit on the shelf. And so this is kind of where I'm working on right now, is to develop that roadmap. How do we get individuals trained so that they can actually speak these multiple languages and really move forward so that we have the opportunity to improve the design process so that things that we do develop will meet the needs for healthy longevity in this future generation. And with that, I'm going to open things up to discussion. And I'd like to hear from all of you. And the questions that I kind of came up with ahead of time are listed here. So what do you think the challenges are? And what are the opportunities in advancing these technologies to support healthy longevity? How can we develop the next generation of individuals to be ready to meet these challenges and opportunities? And what should we look for in terms of mentorship for current innovators, for those of you who are already working in this space, in order to really see improvements in this area? And at that point, we've got a really small group. So I'm just going to suggest we open it up to anybody who wants to chat, bring up any thoughts or questions.
Michele, maybe I'll dive in. So it's George Mears. I'm actually the sponsor for the UK program, but I also sort of run the overall sort of UK Healthy Aging Challenge, and actually the research that we fund is social, behavioural, and design research rather than engineering research. And I think one of the things that sort of has informed what we're doing is a view that we've invested a lot over the last couple of decades in products, and generally they've not spread. So there's been an understanding of the need, and almost what you really liked your illustration of the transport challenge, the final mile or the final actually 15 yards is often the things that stops transport solutions working or not. So thinking about the overall service and the experience of the individual end to end, rather than saying I have a solution that addresses some point issue, I think is really important. So that is the challenge. It's also quite difficult, I think, particularly in sort of academic sense, because a lot of that is less sort of IP protectable. It's less attractive to awards committees, because it's actually the really hard graft of getting something working.
Agreed. And I wonder whether it would make sense. I know within the automotive industry in the US, and I'm sure some of the other industries, I'm in Michigan, so most of the industry I am most familiar with is automotive by default. There were some pre-competitive working groups that were looking at developing technologies before you got to the point of actually applying it, before you needed to get to the point of IP. And I wonder whether having some of these pre-competitive multidisciplinary groups that are really working to understand what the needs are would be a way to approach this, so that we could then hand that information off. The key would be, though, continuing to integrate those populations of potential users into the entire design process, not just getting their ideas at the front end, but also including them in any design reviews and making and validation of the system to make sure it's actually doing what we think. And my big fear is we've got generations of young engineers who think they know best, and really don't have the framework to put what they're doing forward in such a way that it really will be as useful as possible.
I agree. I think the key word here is multidisciplinary, whether it's pre-competitive or not, right? The key is bringing multiple perspectives. And from my perspective, I think I work primarily on proactive care. I'm an engineer also by training. And I designed systems. I used, of course, the user-centered design. I engaged formal and informal caregivers, and as well as older adults. But what I found in terms of scalability, as Dr. McGinnis mentioned, the biggest challenge is two things. Number one, changing practice. So from in my field, you need to work with physicians, nurses who have been trained in a certain way, who accept certain gold standards, even if they're not as gold as they thought they are, right? Even though there are emerging ways to assess functionality and so on and so forth, but they would not accept them readily. And even when they accept them, there are challenges, both behavioral as well as regulatory and financial incentives that prevent them from changing their practice to fully adopt and embrace really the new ways of doing things. So we try to overcome this by doing hackfests and insisting on multidisciplinary teams that include representation from the provider side, right, who understand the business, who understand the regulatory timeframe, understand reimbursement for those countries that have reimbursement rules. But even that was not sufficient. So the practice change remained like bubbled to the top, so to speak.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I think the regulatory aspect really needs to be considered. Many years ago when I did my dissertation, it was on the use of ultrasound to assess osteoporosis. And the company that I was working with kept saying, you need to prove that this is equivalent to DEXA or better than DEXA. And I'm like, but it's doing something completely different. They said, yes, but regulatory wise, it's going to be much simpler for us to go in and just show that this does what DEXA does, but in a different system. And I think that within the FDA, that expectation for many companies of, can we prove that we are like something that's already been approved, constrains things. So it's a good point to bring up. And it's one of those things I've taught in biomedical engineering for years. And for biomedical engineers, we teach them to think about these issues, reimbursement, regulation, all the rest. Traditional engineering, which is now where I'm teaching, aren't taught any of these aspects.
Yep.
So we really need to expand that and get people thinking about those, all those myriad effects.
Absolutely.
Maybe I just come in again. So I think we use 3 A words, if you like, to try and define what it is that we're trying to encourage: attractive, accessible, and affordable. And that's largely because a lot of products were designed to meet an assumed need rather than an assumed want.
Exactly.
And you know, if I often use the example around my neighborhood. It's now increasingly common to see older people walking with walking poles rather than walking sticks or other forms of walkers, because it doesn't signal that you're old, but it does the same job. And actually, they're actually quite cheap and they're very functional, and you know, at certain particular stages of life, they do the right thing. And I think that's a really hard combination to pose to an engineer to actually demonstrate they prove. And we do one baby step in the way of sort of co-design and things, and that's for all our competitions, which is a big challenge in the academic world. We include an older person's panel review of the proposal, because I have overturned recommendations of experts who thought something was great, but I was looking at two sort of reviews from older people who were pointing out, how would this work for real? And so I said, actually, no, I'm not prepared. You know, if we're committed to having the views of older people really embedded in our decision making, we actually have to sit up and pay attention to it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a great idea. At the competition stage, whether it's a student-based competition or a competition for funding later on, to include those groups of individuals. I think that's a really neat idea.
Yeah, and it's
go on, John.
Sorry, go ahead, Michele.
No, I was just going to ask if any of the other four who've been quiet want to add in anything.
I can jump in if you can hear me.
Yes.
Yes.
So I have a problem sharing my video, but I just wanted to maybe take it a little bit from a more general a broader picture of this. So I think I first need to start with saying I think digital development, technology development in healthcare is not very well known so far. So for example, take pharmaceutical development. You have a 10-year period where you do drug discovery, you patent it, and your patent protects you for the next 10 years that you're trying to develop. And then it's a very well known, you start with animals, for example, if you need animal, and then you start with a smaller cohort, bigger cohort, and then you produce your medicine as it should be. And throughout this, you're trying to very different products that you have discovered, drug discovery session, and then you eliminate as you go along. Unfortunately, this doesn't exist in health technology. So part of the stuff that you mentioned in terms of regulatory aspects, design, having people who contribute to the co-design aspect of things, all of this stuff can be, if we can come up with some sort of also a workload of, such as the drug development, that you produce a patent at the beginning and then you go through the phases, and it includes all of these aspects, then it is very well known and everybody knows where they stand and where they need to go. For example, I work with diabetes people, and we are one of the awardees of the Catalyst Awards. And there was a study done in Imperial that they looked into various apps that is developed for people with diabetes. There are hundreds of them, only 5 of them sort of can pass the regulatory aspects, or some of them are even questionable. So it's this aspect needs to be dealt with. I think if this is defined, then you can have also a finance and marketing aspects also more well defined, because you have gone through the process that has proved efficacy, proved usage, proved, and makes it more understandable in terms of how you market something as well. So I think some parts of these issues that we discussed can be resolved if we look at how pharmaceutical process is done.
Yeah, Mohammed, I think that the difference there, and I'm not sure how to address it, is that you can have consumer-focused devices that don't have to go through regulatory approval. And somewhere in the fine print will say, this is not diagnostic, this is not, and put in all the disclaimers. And then to get something to the point where it actually can pass regulatory muster obviously takes much longer. And I think the reason technologies have been trying to walk that tightrope and stay as much as possible onto the consumer side, even though it affects reimbursement, especially in the US, is the technology is changing so quickly that if you were to wait to deploy something until you go through the full regulatory process for an app-based system, for instance, you would be out of date before you made it through FDA. So maybe we need to have some sort of independent review, not FDA, so still not getting to the point where this is diagnostic, but some sort of scientific review, much like we would say peer review of journal articles and all the rest, to say, yes, this does actually do what they say it does. Still not for diagnosis, it's still on the consumer side, but at least it does what they claim it does.
I do agree on that. Technology does evolve much quicker, and then you will have to also adapt to it. And I think that's part of the understanding of it as well. So, for example, let's say average time of a clinical trial, because if you're doing something to do with the healthcare, clinical trial is about 5 years. Within 5 years, for example, take 2007, 2013, where iPhone came in and basically disrupt the mobile industry. So that's so I think there should be also some way of adaptation, meaning, for example, when you submit a product, you have to stick with it. You cannot make changes to it. If you make changes, you have to then go through the process again. So I think that adaptation and changes should be also part of acceptable things that happens with the technology, absolutely within reason, that shows that this is justifiable change that you need to apply, obviously. And that review can be, as you said, in the smaller panels that where people can quickly get an answer to it, rather than going through the whole regulatory again, because they have technology have moved on.
Right.
I think I don't know if the analogy with the pharmaceutical industry is one that we should follow, frankly, on the technology development and data sciences, simply because if you look at, again, the length of the cycle that we all discussed, and even the FDA is now looking at different ways to sort of streamline the review process and streamline that whole process. And the other thing is the fact that, is it societally for the benefit of the end users, right? So when a product is patented, it doesn't become sort of affordable, as George mentioned, until 20 years, until the patents lapse, until it becomes generic. So do we want that, or do we want the iPhone model, right? Where I don't think Apple did follow any of that process. Otherwise, we would still be using the iPhone 3, right? Rather than 12. But probably more agile sort of sprints with end user represented, well, not statistically representative, but representative end users. And we need to keep in mind that, again, the aspect that you alluded to, Michele, in your presentation, that not all older adults have the same likes or wants in a product. So we need to build in personalization and customization options right from the get-go as we start designing, conceptually designing the products.
No, Mohammed, I feel your pain. You know, I think there are lots and lots of people who've been working in the technology, application of technology in healthcare, who you know, find that I suppose the first answer to every question is, I wouldn't do that. And, you know, things have improved. I mean, I can remember the days when it would have been illegal for a physician to view an X-ray on an iPad. So things are moving slowly, but particularly in your area, Mohammed, where you're trying to introduce behavioral cues alongside sort of biomedical sub-data, I think we do need to think about how to be much more creative and encouraging behavior change in what are essentially clinical applications.
Yeah, most certainly. We've had, as you know, we recruited a few patients, and we've been doing, trying to find out ways that we can basically make them more active through some data collections, and then prompting them to see if they can notice some patterns in terms of their changes in activity and how they manage their diabetes. So behavior is the main aspect, I think.
My piece of advice is make it fun, right? Make it that people want to use your app. Seriously. I've been watching the adoption of technology for a long time now. And the need-based technologies that have been on the market, even if they're really good, we've been trying to push them down people's throat for a long time. But over the last 4 or 5 years, we've seen significant increase, exponential increase in the adoption of social connectedness, engagement, gaming technologies among older adults. So if you want it to get adopted, try to make it fun.
Very, very true. Yeah, we use gamifications for some of the stuff that we do, obviously. So that's more of a gamification is more of the user patient side, maybe. On the clinical side, we are more of a data presentation, visualization, and more of the expert system help to it. But in terms of patient side, we have tried a few games, and they seem to like it.
On the clinician side, financial incentives work.
I didn't say anything.
No, well, it's
I mean, reimbursement. Seriously, though, it's the reimbursement and regulatory. So you need to look at what is preventing them. It could be perception that this is going to reduce my clinic's bottom line, right? Or it could be. So you need to really work with your clinical users and really get to the root causes of lack of adoption and embracement.
Yeah, and Mohammed, don't just think, I don't think that the financial side there is all, they just don't want to lose money. My husband's a solo family practitioner, and his financial landscape is how much of my mediocre profit is this going to cut into as I go and try to implement this, even though yes, this is for my patients. I understand it's great for them. I would want to do it. But if you've got a pretty small margin, healthcare in the US is one of those things that there's no way currently to pass on increases in cost to insured patients, because the insurance companies are the ones that are dictating the reimbursement. So, yeah. But if we can convince people that preventative care and the cost of preventing something is cost effective, maybe we can get reimbursement to work on some of these things. Other thoughts from Niru or Don?
Yeah, I probably just is one quick comment. I think for this generation, for the older people right now into their for the 70s and maybe older, probably it's hard for them to use for the robot, because you have this robot that I just look at. But I think for the future generation, when the people right now into their 30 and 40, when they get old, I think this will be the norm.
Yes, very true. Trying to figure out what hurdles we have to clear with the current older generation compared to what the next older generation will be comfortable with is one of those things that it's an ever-changing landscape. I think by the time our 20-somethings are looking at this, VR will be the will be so integrated into their lives because they're doing so much with augmented reality and virtual reality now anyway. So anything else, anybody?
The interesting thing will be what next technology makes AR and VR feel like yesterday.
Right.
Because I think we'll always find older people have become used to technologies from before. So, you know, when I constantly hear people say, well, you know, when this Silver Surfer generation becomes universal, they'll be there. But actually, I've witnessed in my own sort of family and elders how, even for instance, their word processing skills are allied to an application that was invented 15 years ago and is no longer supported by various software companies, and they lose those skills very quickly.
Yes, because they do tend to be more focused on a specific type of software rather than being able to translate what they have learned to something else. And maybe it's age-based. I don't know. I kind of hope that as we're younger, our minds are a little bit more elastic and can adapt. And maybe we'll all run into that issue in the future. I'm not sure.
But it's a very common issue. I mean, in a completely different context. In the UK, people will either cook with electricity or cook with natural gas. And there have been all sorts of sensors and systems put in place for older people who forget to turn the gas off. Why? Because actually trying to convert people to electricity actually requires them to develop a whole new set of skills, which they don't want. And I think that, you know, that's a very simple technology, but there are all sorts of technologies that will face the same issues.
Very true. I will say, George, one thing the UK has figured out a little bit better, at least than a lot of our areas in the US, is public transportation. So,
yeah, I mean, even
it may not be great. So I'm actually British. I don't sound it, but I am British, and so the accessibility.
Well, I'm actually half American. But trying to walk in the US is really difficult.
Right. Absolutely.
I can think of countless places I've been where I think the stores are 15 minutes away. I'll just walk, but there are no sidewalks, or there's a 4-lane highway to take your life into your own hands to try and get across. But yeah, I mean, of course, the UK is so much more compact. Right. You know, we think of a long journey as being 2 hours.
Correct. And for us, I drive 70 miles to get from my home up to campus. So that would never happen. Although time-wise, I have relatives who live out in the affordable suburbs and commute into London on a daily basis. So time-wise, it's probably about the same.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts as we wrap this up?
One for Dan or Mohammed?
Thanks for the great opportunity to be part of this.
Lots of exciting possibilities.
And I'll just say, Michele, you know, continue your mission to teach inclusive design as an absolutely core part of what this needs. And you know, leading light in design in the UK, Professor Jeremy Myerson, who is the sort of, it's called the Helen Hamlin Professor of Design at the Royal College of Art. So Helen Hamlin champions inclusive design. And he's a firm proponent that actually if we design for some of the more complicated cases, we create things that actually have universal appeal. So yes, continue the mission.
Thank you very much. All right. Well, I guess Catherine will let everybody go and move on to their next session. Thank you for joining us, and hope you enjoy the rest of the virtual summit. We're all getting used to this new conference from your living room. So
Well, we
all
are
right.
looking forward to meeting people again sometime.
Absolutely.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you so much, Michele. That was really great.
Good. I'm glad it worked. Hopefully we had more people in some of the other sessions, but I think we had some good conversation. So
I think so too. It was a nice discussion.
Yep.
Well, it was nice meeting you as well, and I hope you
You too.
enjoy the rest of the summer. Take care.
you too. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.